This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Claudia Gomez Gonzalez, that is the name of the 19-year-old indigenous Guatemalan woman who U.S. Border Patrol agents shot in the head last week, killing her in Texas near the U.S. border. Claudia's nickname was Princesita, or Little Princess. The Guatemalan consulate in Del Rio, Texas, has called for an investigation into her death while criticizing the violence and excessive use of force by the Border Patrol. The Border Patrol initially claimed that the shooting occurred after an agent, quote, came under attack by multiple subjects using blunt objects. The original statement described Claudia as one of the assailants, but later the agency changed its story, saying the agent opened fire after, quote, the group ignored the verbal commands and instead rushed him.
But a resident who lives near the shooting said she never heard the agent yell anything. At the time of her death, Claudia was headed to Virginia, where her boyfriend, Yosimar Morales, lives. Yosimar posted this emotional video message online.
First off, good evening. I want to thank the people who live in Texas at the border. Thank you for all the support you have given me. And to social media, thank you for the support to continue moving forward. I know that losing a family member is a painful thing, losing a loved one. Despite all the plans that one has to see each other again, unfortunately, it didn't happen like that. My girlfriend was killed while crossing the border. An immigration agent shot her. Unfortunately, she was shot in the head and killed immediately. I'm asking, please, for everyone who sees this video, support me in demanding justice and bringing to justice the person who did this. Losing a family member is painful. It's tragic. Losing a loved one. I'm asking for your help in demanding justice. Thank you.
Claudia Gomez Gonzalez's family says she was attempting to come to the United States to further her education. This is her mother, Lydia Gonzalez.
I'll save some money, she said. I'll earn money for my studies, she said. But unfortunately, she wasn't able to do that. My poor little girl, my little baby. No, no, no. This can't be. She's gone, my baby. That's how it is. I want justice for my girl because it's not fair for them to do this. Now, if people are able to help me retrieve my baby's body as soon as possible, that's what I want. We can't do anything else now. She's dead. She's dead.
The shooting death of Claudia Gomez Gonzalez is not an isolated incident. A recent investigation by The Guardian newspaper revealed the U.S. government has paid over $60 million over the past decade to settle claims against Border Patrol. This includes at least 20 wrongful death claims filed against CBP. That's Customs and Border Patrol. To talk more about these stories, we're joined by two guests. Aster Dominguez is director of the ACLU Border Rights Center, and Sarah McAree is an award-winning investigative journalist and contributor to The Guardian. Earlier this month, she wrote a three-part investigation into Border Patrol violence. But we're going to begin with Aster Dominguez. Talk about exactly what you know happened to Claudia.
Good morning, Amy. We know that last week on Wednesday, May 23rd, according to Border Patrol, Claudia Patricia Gomez Gonzalez crossed the border with a group of immigrants. Border Patrol arrived to the scene after someone reported illegal activity and encountered the group. What we know after is that Border Patrol states the group attacked the agent with blunt objects, calling Claudia one of the assailants, and shot her in the head. On Friday, Border Patrol retracted and doesn't call her an assailant anymore, but a member of the group that was crossing. And the agency states that the agent was no longer wasn't attacked by a blunt object, but the group rushed to the agent, and the group didn't follow any commands. What we also know is from the neighbor who recorded this incident right after it had happened. There is the reason why Border Patrol should be wearing body-worn cameras. This would give us more clarity as to what happened to Claudia and what led that agent to shoot Claudia. We have that video in which Miss Marta screams at the agents and protests the violence that took place right at her backyard.
Well, Astrid, you've been working on this issue for quite a while. Your concerns, could you talk about Customs and Border Patrol and their tactics as they attempt to stem the flow of migrants coming across the border?
Sure. We have several concerns about this particular case. Is what happened to the 3 immigrants that crossed with Claudia? What is going to happen to them? Will they be deported? They shouldn't be deported. They should have legal representation, and there might be key witnesses. We need to know what happened to Claudia, and they should be telling their story without fear of being intimidated. Now, this agency has a track record of violence. This isn't the first case, sadly, where immigrants are killed at the hands of Border Patrol. There's been, in the past 8 years, around 50 people that have been killed by the hands of Border Patrol. And the agency also has a very bad track record in terms of accountability and oversight. We're talking about an agency that that has a record, and the officers, when they violate policy, are not accountable for their actions. Just an example, the 2020 video that probably you've seen of the teenage boy, Cruz Marquez. He was a teenage boy that was crossing the San Diego border, and he was suspected of carrying liquid meth. The agents asked the teenage boy to drink the liquid meth right there against policy. The child died right after that. Now, these agents are still in the job, and there's no discipline, or there was no action taken as far as we know. There is a lot of reforms that this agency needs, and among them, we're talking about the use of force and their policy manuals as well.
I wanted to turn to Claudia's aunt, Dominga Vicente.
This isn't the first person who has died in this country. There are various people. They are treating us like animals, and this isn't the way it should be. I'm asking the authorities and the institutions, impose some discipline or call upon the U.S. government to stop treating us in this way, like animals.
That's Claudia's aunt, Dominga. I wanted to bring Sarah Macare into this conversation, as she says she's not the only person who has been killed. Talk about your investigation, Sarah.
Thank you for having me on, Amy. I'm glad to be here to talk about this, because what I found when I looked at fatal encounters with Border Patrol agents over the last 15 years, not including just fatal shootings, but all manner of encounters, I found, counting Claudia's death now, 98 fatal encounters with Border Patrol agents in the last 15 years. And that includes shootings, as I mentioned, and shootings in which incidents like what happened to Claudia, you know, that there are a pattern among them, among those fatal encounters. But the fatal encounters also include a whole nother litany of violence. As Astrid mentioned, there have been fatal encounters that have happened as a result of malice and negligence. In addition to the incident that happened with the teenager attempting to cross, there have been people who have drowned. There have been people who've died from supposedly non-lethal force, people who've died after being pepper sprayed and tased and beaten. I found that through looking at civil suit settlements the agency has paid out over the last dozen or so years. I separately looked at fatal encounters because what I started seeing in all the civil suit settlements were a number of wrongful death claims, and I felt that probably only hinted. The number was so small, and I had heard of so many other incidents. I felt that the number of claims that have actually settled out only hinted at what was a broader pattern of violence. And so I saw 20 wrongful death claims over a dozen or so years, but digging deeper, looking at fatal encounters, some of which have been dismissed in court, some of which have never made it to court, because another important point that Astrid shared are that in many instances, some of the eyewitnesses are migrants themselves. And without those eyewitness accounts, it's very hard to bring a complaint. The cases that we do know about, share features of that came up in the shooting of Claudia Gomez Gonzalez. And the only reason we know about some of these other cases is because of the persistence of family members, in demanding justice, and because of solidarity of, border communities in supporting family members in those claims. This is not the first shooting by far in which we've seen agents allege, that people were throwing objects at them. Most prevalently, that's been rocks. There have been a number of cross-border shooting incidents where alleged rock throwing has come up, but there have also been those shootings inside the United States, one of which was even settled under the current Department of Justice, in which a man was alleged to have thrown, what an agent called basketball-sized rocks at him from above. That agent was back at work within 6 days. Local news media reported. What the lawyer in that case told me, that the current Department of Justice settled out that case for $500,000, told me that the medical examiner's report was at odds with the agent's account because the man died from 2 downward trajectory bullet wounds and was of very slight stature to be throwing basketball-sized rocks. Rock throwing and the throwing of objects allegedly has come up so often in use of deadly force among Border Patrol agents that it even prompted a change in policy in 2014, which stated that, after looking at many incidents, and this came from the current chief of the Border Patrol at the time, what a study of those incidents found was that agents could, in many instances, simply move out of harm's way, that deadly force wasn't necessary. And so that prompted a change in policy regarding thrown objects in 2014. And the shooting of Claudia Gomez Gonzalez is one that's taken place since then that seems to be, from what we can tell, although the facts are obscured, which is another common occurrence in many of these fatal shooting incidents. But from what we can tell, this shooting would seem to be in violation of that policy regarding their initial claim, which they've already walked back.
Sarah, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that you ferreted out many of these cases through looking through civil suits. Many of these deaths got very little publicity, but certainly the Customs and Border Patrol knows exactly who dies and interactions with them. What's your sense of the accountability within the agency in terms of the agents involved in these cases?
I think that when people say this agency, that there's a culture of impunity in this agency, when people say that this agency acts as if it's above the law, I think that that is absolutely a fair statement. What I found when I looked at, anything I could find regarding accountability and oversight for some of these incidents, there's a shooting that was not dissimilar from that of Claudia Gomez Gonzalez that goes back to 2007, although I found fatal incidents before that and fatal shootings before that. But the one that occurred in 2007 is notable. It was a young man, approximately 20 years old, had recently crossed the border. According to the civil suit, he was with siblings. The Border Patrol agent that showed up as a result of a National Guard alert. And soon afterwards, a young man was shot and killed, in the words of the complaint, execution style. The government went on to settle that civil suit for $750,000. In a very, very rare instance, the agent in that shooting was actually criminally charged, and twice he walked away free after a hung jury. Having brought charges against him is very rare. A conviction is even rarer. We've yet to see that. We've actually just seen another Border Patrol agent who was found not guilty of murder, although he'll be retrialed again he'll face a retrial again this fall in the shooting death, a cross-border shooting death of a teen who allegedly threw rocks. So those are two very rare instances in which criminal charges were brought, but in which there were no convictions. Meanwhile, in terms of the agency's own internal reviews, they set up a national use of force review board. But if you look at any public report, any report that review board has made public, they have found, all of the incidents in accordance with standing policy at the time. Although some of those incidents have actually compelled the agency to even change their policy regarding, firing at shooting vehicles and regarding, allegedly thrown objects. And so, you know, there's very little accountability that we can tell has taken place.
I wanted to bring Astrid back into the conversation. Astrid Dominguez, talk about the new ACLU report detailing the widespread abuse and neglect of unaccompanied immigrant children detained by border agents during the Obama administration. The ACLU uncovering documents detailing verbal, physical, sexual abuse of migrant children, the denial of clean drinking water, adequate food, failure to provide necessary medical care, detention and freezing, unsanitary conditions. Can you talk about what further you found and what you're demanding?
This report was published last week. As you well stated, these are documents that the agency provided that go from 2009 to 2014. The agency provided to over 30,000 pages of internal documents of complaints that have been placed against CBP from children abuses. And this is, I mean, the stories are appalling. There are stories from kids claiming that the agents not only beat them, but also psychologically mistreated them, calling them dogs, threatening them with rape or, they were going to let them die. The kids were refused basic necessities, just like you mentioned, like water, food. A girl was sexually assaulted. An agent opened up her legs and touched her so hard that she screamed. And these documents are on our website at the ACLU.
So we only have 30 seconds, but what you're calling for in those cases and in the case of Claudia?
So first of all, what we need, it's an investigation. We need to know that these types of abuses are not happening anymore. Even though this was during the Obama administration, we ought to make sure that CBP has changed and that these abuses are not currently happening. Second of all, the oversight agencies over CBP, which is the OIG, the Office of Inspector General, the Civil Rights Civil Liberties Office, and their internal affairs should also have greater powers to make sure that agents are held accountable for their actions and that these abuses no longer happen to kids who are in Border Patrol custody. I
want to thank you both very much for being with us. Astrid Dominguez, director of the ACLU's Border Rights Center, speaking to us from Houston, and Sarah McRae, award-winning investigative journalist, contributor to The Guardian, speaking to us from St. Louis. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks for joining us.